we're really delighted to have you all with us to talk about the well-being footprint. My name is Nick Henderson-Mayo. I'm Director of Learning and Content at VinciWorks. Thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to look at mental health first aid, and it's long been a go-to concept for organizations looking to offer better well-being support across their organization. And so the concept has been widely adopted by many organizations, but it has come with mixed results and not without some level of controversy. So we do want to get into the details of that today and think about our approach to mental health support at work in general. I'm really delighted to be joined by Eileen Donnelly, who's the founder and CEO of Ripple&Co. Great to have you with us today, Eileen. And she has a lot of fantastic insights to share with us. Hi, Eileen. Welcome to you.
Hello. Good to be here. Thanks, Nick.
And we really want to hear from you during the webinar as well. So please do keep writing in your questions, your thoughts, and we'll do our best to share those as we go through the webinar and put your questions to either ourselves or to Eileen as well as we go through. Just before we do that, though, we do have some upcoming webinars that we wanted to share with you. And there are links to register for those coming up in the chat, or you can also share those links with others in your organization that may be interested. Next week, we're looking at our OmniTrack software product, which is all about enhancing your compliance workflows. Then the week after that, we're looking at how to avoid a bribery prosecution based on some new guidance that's come out from the Serious Fraud Office. And then on Wednesday, the 23rd of July, we're going to have a little look at a year of the Labour government, what's changed in compliance up until now, and what we can expect from the rest of this Parliament. So those links to those webinars to register for those are coming up in the chat now. And at VinciWorks, we are focused on delivering the most up-to-date compliance advice on what you need to know about new regulations and new legislation. So there is a lot of change that is about to happen with the new Employment Rights Bill, which will be very soon becoming law. And we have a very detailed guide to all the health and safety requirements in that new legislation. So a link to download that is coming up in the chat, and we're going to keep that updated as we get more information about the legislation. And we have another new guide, and it's not directly related to mental health. It's a very important aspect of workplace support and around supporting a collaborative working environment for everyone that's in the workplace. And that is a guide to protected belief at work based on some of the recent court cases and some new guidance that's come out from different parts of the government. So you can download that guide as well. So at VinciWorks, we provide e-learning training on a variety of subjects, including mental health. And we wanted to show just a few videos from those courses through the webinar, as we also chat to Eileen to get a real sense of the different aspects around mental health at work. So let's just see a very short clip about mental health at work from our new course to kind of set the tone for this discussion.
I was in charge of 30 young children and just found myself panicking.
I went to the doctors. I was really tearful, depressed, really bad anxiety.
You feel like a failure. You feel like you're not doing your job properly.
A cliche, but I went into a shop to buy a pint of milk and I couldn't find my way out again.
I had a lot of anxiety.
I imagined that I was developing brain tumours and cancer and heart disease, because I was under so much stress that these feelings manifested themselves in my mind.
I hadn't told anybody about how I was feeling. As I say, I didn't realise I was ill. And I left home one morning having planned my own suicide.
I had, what you call a breakdown, really. I ended up taking an overdose.
I can remember being at home by myself, crying an awful lot, screaming, shouting, hitting myself.
Mental health problems can be made worse by a lack of awareness, understanding and support within the workplace.
We all have mental health. It's not something that's unusual or abnormal. It's something that is just a natural part of our health and well-being. So not talking about it, well, leads to all sorts of problems.
I think if you talk to people who've had mental health problems, what they really find the most upsetting is the avoidance of the issue. And for them, because of the place that they're in their own feelings and their own self-esteem and how they're managing, they kind of feel rejected and uncared for.
When I was working, the meetings we had were always, again, were about work. What, have you finished what you need to do? Have you done that? Have you met that person? Have you done what this? There wasn't a lot of time for, how you doing?
It is very hard to know how to speak to people about things, but it's important not to be embarrassed, I think, but somehow be able to show them a little bit of extra friendship, to open up a conversation with them. And you'll find very often people actually do want to talk.
So that was just a short clip that looked at some of the issues that we're facing around mental health in the workplace today. And if you want to see more of that course, you can write the word demo into the chat anytime. So Eileen, we saw there some of the issues that we're facing around mental health in the workplace, and really grateful to have you with us to talk about some of these issues and how we tackle them. But first of all, just tell us about your work with Ripple&Co.
Yeah, sure. Well, we specialize in workplace wellbeing strategy. So we help organizations really move from their well-intentioned efforts to real measurable impact. So it's not just about those one-off initiatives. We support our clients to build something much more embedded and lasting in the organization. Often it does start with training, but it does go far beyond that. For example, we very regularly will look at leadership behaviors, peer support networks, policy alignment, the whole culture really. Because for wellbeing to truly stick, yes, it has to be trained in, but it also then needs to be supported in practice and reflected in how people actually experience their work on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And how did you first get involved in the issue of workplace mental health training?
Well, I actually came into this space from sustainability and corporate responsibility in the corporate sector. I was a director in a global FTSE 250. And I think like a lot of people who've spent time in high pressure environments, I saw the human cost up close and sometimes personally myself. And mental health, well, it often wasn't acknowledged, or if it was actually too little and too late. And that experience has really stayed with me. So I now believe that employee wellbeing, in essence, is the ultimate form of corporate responsibility. So for me, this work was the next logical step, and in some way, certainly since COVID, the most urgent. So that experience has really changed how I approach training provision for the corporate sector, having been in it. We do things a little bit differently as a result of my corporate experience.
And why do you think mental health support in the workplace is such a pressing issue right now?
Because it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's often hidden, but it is everywhere. The stats tell us that. Well, for example, mental health is now the #1 reason for long-term sickness absence in the UK. It's overtaken musculoskeletal. And that comes with a huge cost to people personally, but also to business. And I know how important that is. And I think for that reason, leaders are really starting to wake up to it. Deloitte are estimating the cost is up to £56 billion a year. You can't ignore that number. It's enormous. So I think that's a huge reason why the shift is happening. Mental health is being seen not just as a side initiative, a campaign, an internal comms initiative, but it's actually part of an employer's legal sense of duty as well as that moral imperative. And plus, we're increasingly working with health and safety professionals now who are beginning to realize that connection between the impact of poor mental health on fundamental safety metrics, and then the need to see their health and safety role, that health part, has a really wider context than was previously really appreciated.
Absolutely. It's definitely becoming more of a holistic approach, at least from that respect. And if you do want to know more about Ripple&Co, you can write the word Ripple into the chat at any point, and Eileen and her team will be in touch with you to talk more about that. We want to get into the subject, obviously, mental health first aid, but let's start with a poll about that. So there'll be one coming up on the screen in a moment. So does your organization currently have mental health first aiders? Do you have that in your workplace? So either yes, active and supported, yes, but maybe a little more limited structure support, no, you're considering it, and no, you're not considering it. We'll make that the last one there. So does your organization currently have mental health first aiders? Yes, it's active and supported. Yes, but limited structure and support. No, but we're considering it. Or no, you're not considering it. So give everyone a moment to answer that question. Then we're going to ask a follow-up just shortly after. So let's give everyone a moment first for this one. And then we will see some of the results coming up on the screen. So really interesting there. 35% do have a mental health first aid in their work. 33% all have, but it's more limited in structure and support, and 32% know, but potentially considering it or maybe not considering it. Very, very interesting set of results there. So for those that do have in their workplace, whether fully supported or not, we have a follow-up question for this now. This is multiple choice, so you can answer all that apply. What is your biggest challenge with mental health first aiders right now? Would you say it's finding the right people, maybe burnout or emotional fatigue, no consistent support after training, don't have enough data or visibility, maybe budget justification or trying to prove the ROI, or not sure what good looks like? So for those that do have mental health first aiders in the organization, what would you say is your biggest or one of your biggest challenges? Finding the right people, burnout or emotional fatigue, no consistent support after training, lack of data or visibility, budget justification or proving the ROI, or not sure what good in terms of mental health first aiders would look like. So give everyone just another moment for that poll question, and we'll see some of people's thoughts. And do also feel free to write to us in the chat if one of these options doesn't say enough, if you'd like to tell us a little bit more, and we'll read out some of your comments as well. So a really interesting spread of answers there. As we can see, 25% finding the right people is the biggest issue, 19% burnout, emotional fatigue. Interestingly, 46% don't have consistent support after training, 32% lack of data or visibility, 19% budget justification or ROI, and 31% not sure what good looks like when it comes to mental health first aid. So a really, really interesting spread there, Eileen. Lots for us to think about. Is that consistent with what you're seeing?
Yeah, very, very consistent. And I think that the end-to-end approach with mental health first aid is really becoming something that is a key feature of conversations we're having with clients, that it isn't just training and then move on. So yeah, there's something really interesting in those results, which reflect exactly the conversations I'm having, but also the research that we've done ourselves into mental health first aid.
Fantastic. Well, it's good to see in some ways. But take us through back a step, actually, first of all, for maybe some of us that are not so familiar, what exactly is a mental health first aider?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually, because it isn't a new concept. But I think first and foremost, it's worth saying they're not therapists. They're not here to fix, diagnose, but very, very clearly what they are is vital when done right. So mental health first aiders are trained peer supports who can spot when something isn't quite right before it worsens, that earlier intervention, and often be that first line of support and guide someone toward further help if needed. You know, they're kind of the people who say, I see you, I've got you, and that is what can really make the difference.
Absolutely. And some of us might think it's a newer concept, but actually the idea of peer support has been around for decades. So what's changed then with mental health first aid?
Yeah, as I say, absolutely. It isn't new. Peer support isn't new. What has changed is that organisations are now formalising it. So Mental Health First Aid England did a great start and a great job of starting that process. But of course, you know, they don't represent an industry standard. There isn't an industry standard like any new field. It's not got the rigour and the governance around it yet. And Mental Health First Aid England were just the first and the most vocal. There are different providers of mental health first aid training and even different courses. Like for ours, at Ripple, we've got an Ofqual regulated, accredited version, as well as a version that carries CPD credits. So now workplace peer support is having more structure, more visibility, and naturally more investment. But let's not forget, it does carry more responsibility too once people embark on this journey, because those trained individuals, in essence, and to some extent, legally speaking as well, they are fulfilling, in part, an employer's duty of care. You know, they're trained with business money on business time, and they're fulfilling their role on business time. In essence, they are an agent of the business, which I think is something that is often missed and certainly wasn't talked about at the beginning of the formalization of mental health first aid as peer supports. So, you know, just because it's become more popular, it doesn't mean it's risk-free. It needs to be implemented in the right way.
So really, really important points there for us to remember. And what do you think the concept then of mental health first aid gets right about supporting mental health at work?
Yeah, well, when it's done right, it's very sort of people-centric. You know, it's whilst also recognizing the potential risks if not implemented correctly. And it's empowering colleagues to look out for one another at its simplest form. And that ripple effect, no pun intended, that can really shift the tone of a whole team. But the magic really happens when it's embedded into the culture of the organization, when the leaders are on board, when follow-up, post-training support is built in. That's when it really moves from being helpful to genuinely being transformative.
And what would you say maybe are some of the kind of misconceptions then people have about mental health first aid?
So I think for me, it's the biggest one is that it's a silver bullet. That once someone's been trained, the job's done. It's not therapy, and it's not a standalone solution. It has to sit inside a much wider framework, you know, the boundaries, support, and of course, leadership behind it as well. And another thing that people often don't realise, that not all training is created equal. You know, I've seen lots of different types of training, lots of different trainers. Mental health first aid is not at all a standard off-the-shelf product when it comes down to it. But, you know, please don't get me on that. That's a conversation for another day.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for taking us through the basics. That was very, very helpful to know. Let's ask the audience another poll question now. So if we'll see that pop up on the screen in a second, which is maybe around the biggest concerns you might have around mental health first aid in your organization. So the biggest concern then you have around mental health first aid in your organization, whether or not you have it in place or you're thinking about it, what would be your biggest concern there? Risk of burnout or emotional overload, maybe lack of boundaries or overstepping the role, insufficient or poor signposting, not enough follow-up or structure after training, a lack of insight from people's conversations, or you don't have concerns. Maybe it's all working very well, and you can also answer multiple of those or tell us a little bit more in the chat. What are your biggest concerns around mental health first aid in your organization? A risk of burnout or emotional overload, lack of clear boundaries, overstepping the role, insufficient or poor signposting, little follow-up or structure after training, lack of insight from the conversations, or you don't have any concerns at all. Let's take a look at some of the answers there. So again, we had a really interesting spread with 41% noting the risk of burnout or emotional overload is one of the biggest concerns. 39% a lack of boundaries or overstepping the role. 26% insufficient per signposting. 46%, similar to what we saw before, a lack of follow-up or structure after training. 20% lack of insight from the conversations, and only 7% saying it's working well. Eileen, any thoughts on those answers? Is that consistent to what you're seeing?
Yeah, very, very consistent. Thank you for putting them up again. Yeah, the lack of insight, I think that's such a missed opportunity. You can preserve anonymity without you can preserve anonymity but still get the insight. We can perhaps talk about that later. Little follow-up or structure, 100%. You know, to have a refresher course 3 years on, it's not enough. It's not enough. These people need support for themselves and continual elements of CPD. Insufficient or poor signposting, you know, it actually scares me that people take on this role and then don't signpost on. Or I hear about people who are Googling resources to signpost people to. So there's no one version of the truth that an organization is using. Plus, you may well have loads of resources yourself that you want people to be signposted to, not necessarily out there in the business. I think the biggest one is that what's the load, the emotional load on the first aider themselves, and that becomes because of the lack of clear boundaries, or them having that hero mentality where they really want to help. Our research showed that people come to this role because they want to help, because of their own direct or indirect experience. That needs managing carefully. Makes them great peer supports, but it needs to be managed really carefully.
Absolutely. And I think that's echoed with some of the comments in the chat. Some people saying that the business is worried about the impact on the first aiders if they brought this into place. Someone else saying that there's a management fear that if they talk about mental health issues, then everyone will suddenly have lots of problems. So there's a kind of a broad range of thoughts on that, which is really interesting to see. Let's actually take a look at another short video from one of our mental health courses, looking at around spotting the signs of stress.
Being aware of the warning signs that someone is suffering from stress can alert us to the fact that something is wrong.
It didn't occur to me that I was getting mentally ill. It just felt like I was gradually losing energy, finding it more difficult to make decisions, withdrawing from others socially.
There are certain things we can look out for. Their appearance may change. They might behave in a way that's out of character for them. They may start taking more days off sick. Their performance may deteriorate, or they may become withdrawn or uncommunicative.
I began to notice myself becoming much more withdrawn and much less able to make clear decisions at work, and less able to cope with deadlines for tasks.
First and foremost, it's about knowing your people. So one of the best indications of whether there might be a problem around stress or mental health is when you see someone behaving over a period of time in a way that's just not typical of them.
How's it going? Only if you want some help, you can always ask me.
It's getting late now. Why didn't you offer to help when I asked you a week ago?
I had friends around me who, even though they didn't entirely understand what was happening to me, were aware of the fact that I wasn't doing my very best and that I actually needed support.
The best way of being helped is to be listened to by someone who believes you and who is prepared to listen to you.
Some colleagues naturally were very comfortable and wanted to talk about it. Others were more reserved and felt perhaps I didn't want to mention the fact that I'd had some mental health issues.
If you are in doubt about approaching somebody, if you do it with an open mind and you do it without judging them and you just ask an open question and show that you actually care that they really don't look very well or they're behaving in a way that you know is not the norm for them, then you're actually showing caring and compassion. And when you talk to people who've come through the other end of a mental health journey at work, what they often say is, what really was a turning point for me is just somebody noticing.
So that was a clip there from one of VinciWorks courses around spotting the signs of stress, and also mentioning the importance of people talking to others. And if you want to see more of that course, you can write demo into the chat. If you want to hear more from Eileen, please do write Ripple into the chat to talk about that. Eileen, I'd like to look at some of the issues around the evidence around mental health first aid's effectiveness, because a lot of us, if we want to, bring in something like this, we may need to show ROI, we need to show how does it actually work. So what is the research saying then about how effective this is?
Yeah, so we know that peer support works. Research tells us that in some contexts it can be even more effective than traditional interventions, paid interventions, so therapy, and that is because of that connection that you'll have with a peer. But when it comes to mental health first aid specifically, the research actually is mixed. When it's done well with proper supervision and cultural alignment, we know from pieces of research that it can reduce burnout, it can boost resilience, and also lower absence. But I think that's the point. I don't think we've got enough evidence yet of companies who have done it from end to end with the appropriate recruitment and with post-training support, enough for us to know that it works in the workplace context, because people are skipping that support structure. So unfortunately, at the moment, the impact is patchy at best, but there's no reason why it shouldn't work when we know that from other research, peer support, traditional peer support, does work.
Yeah, and when it's done right, obviously it can really be effective. But is there a risk then if it's not done right, or it's just kind of slapped onto something, that it just becomes like a tick box exercise?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that comes with the fact that it's one of the most popular interventions. We've seen it happen. A 2-day course, a certificate, a lanyard, and then no follow-up. That's not peer support. That's just optics. If you want mental health first aid to actually make a difference, you need to integrate it and have that post support. You need clarity. You need commitment beyond just that training program. And there are simple yet incredibly effective ways of doing that. We do them, but because training is just the starting line.
Yeah. And how much then do you think then the success of a program like this would depend on culture as opposed to just doing the training?
Yeah, culture is everything. Eat strategy for breakfast, doesn't it? You can have the most passionate and skilled mental health first aider, and I have seen it in organizations with hundreds, so 300 in this particular instance. But if the environment doesn't allow them to be effective, because people perhaps are scared to speak up, then they're just going to hit a wall. And that's where I think leaders are crucial for the culture. Leaders need to model vulnerability. People need to feel safe speaking up. Otherwise, the first aider is holding something the organization hasn't really committed to, to holding with them. They've got to do that together.
It's a really, really important point that you need that support structure. Otherwise, you're almost putting people at even more risk by just kind of letting them kind of at it without that support. Any kind of examples that you've seen then of that really stand out to you?
Yeah, we worked with one organisation that has really stood out for me, and that really is because we didn't just deliver training and then leave. They were relaunching their mental health first aid network, and we've continued to work with them regularly, coaching them, extending their training. They're in a high risk sector, so suicide awareness and prevention for some of their first aiders. And then touching in with them regularly, giving them the tools to be proactive. We also offer them reflective practice, kind of a kind of supervision type space where they can feel heard with their peers. So you're not just waiting for someone to be in a position of burnout. And equally, because they're being proactive, they're not waiting for their colleagues to be in a situation of crisis. They were previously running campaigns, supporting colleagues early, but it's all about really influencing the whole culture and the whole sort of policy landscape as well. And the result is that they've seen a visible shift in their culture. It's really opened up. It's been incredibly powerful. And that is because what made it work so well is it's become embedded. It wasn't left to chance. Training gone. It was supported, structured, treated as part of how the business operates, and that's something we aim to replicate with all of our clients.
Fantastic. And just a reminder, if you want to keep that conversation going with Eileen, please write Ripple into the chat, and Eileen and the team will be very happy to keep that conversation going with you. I just wanted to share a very brief story about VinciWorks and what we did once. We haven't done mental health first aid, but we did something called mental health scoring, which is from a few years ago, where we invited people to share a daily kind of mental health score in their Slack name, and then invited some of those people to then post like an update on how they were feeling that particular day if they wanted to, in a kind of closed channel, and wanted to see if that act of just sharing how people felt actually made a difference. And the overall goal was to see if we could get more kind of an open and sharing workplace culture and encourage people to be more open. And it was actually proved quite popular. We had 71% agreeing or strongly agreeing that it was a good way to encourage people to talk about mental health at work. and also made them think about their own well-being. And during that kind of 12 weeks we ran this experiment, we found there was a 7% drop in people feeling stressed at work, 6% drop people feeling upset, and the kind of people's self-reported enjoying experiencing of interacting with their colleagues was at 92% before, and gone up to 97% after the experiment. So I think there's something around trying different things around mental health support at work, and you know, different things will work for different kinds of organizations, and actually just thinking about what you might do to support people in your workplace is a good first step. And let's actually ask another poll question of the audience. Which of these would you most like to strengthen in your organization's mental health approach? You want to maybe improve manager confidence, improve peer support or the structure, evaluation and measurement, strategic alignment with business goals, or not sure where to start. So that first option is just around manager confidence and capability. Would you like to strengthen peer support or that MHFA structure maybe you have? Would you like to strengthen evaluation and measurement to kind of prove the benefits of that? Strategic alignment with business goals, or not sure where to start? And please do also share your thoughts in the chat. We'll see what people are saying there. But we'll give everyone a second to answer that poll question, and we'll look at some of the results of that. Come up on our screen in just a moment. Let's have a look. Okay, so 54% saying manager confidence and capability is really the key thing they want to strengthen. 41% saying peer support and the MHFA structure. 26% are in evaluation and measurement. 28% strategic alignment with business goals, and 16% just not sure where to start really. And do keep sharing your thoughts in the chat as well. We have a few people saying there things like, what would a proportionate approach for a small organization to be? What maybe the risks of overstepping boundaries in a smaller team? I would imagine things like that, Eileen, really come into when you're actually doing this correctly, or doing this in the way it should be done. You're able to kind of address all of those kind of main issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, to your point of you know, where because I know that Liz is asking, you know, well, what does it look like when it's done right? And I think to sort of look first, if we talk about where the gaps are, you then will realize actually, well, what does it look like to be done right? And for me, there are two massive gaps in the current version of mental health first aid. And the first one is right at the start, recruitment and selection, because not everyone is a good fit for the mental health first aid role. You know, it does need to be selected. And I know some organizations, particularly the bigger ones, will just have an open door. And if you've got enough budget to throw that at your organization and anyone can be trained, then you're raising the level of mental health literacy. Fantastic. But if you're looking to actually train peer supports, then it needs to be selected. And the reason I say that is because otherwise you risk harming both the volunteer and the person they're trying to support. So there are ways of ensuring the most appropriate people are put forward and then take part in that training. So that's kind of almost a risk assessment that we do with organizations. The second gap I see, and we've been talking about it, is this post-training support. Because if there's no ongoing supervision or reflection on their part, even the best training is going to fade. So there is a way of gaining that valuable insight we talked about, which sort of goes hand in hand with the supervision and the reflection. And if you get that insight, then you are more likely to be able to do a proactive approach to wellbeing, a more preventative approach to a wellbeing strategy. And both of those two gaps came out really strongly in our research a couple of years ago. And they are surprisingly common. So we're actually looking at the moment to try to delve even further into this. We're all about an evidence base. Let's not just go out there on a whim and think what might work and what's popular. So at the moment, we're doing some more research into the tools and resources that mental health first aiders are accessing. And anyone can take part. So I know that we're going to put a link in the chat, because we'd love people to take part in this. And the idea is that you take the survey link, and then you send it to your mental health first aiders. Now, the whole thing will remain anonymous in terms of company names, but we will take the company names and play back your results to you, and then we'll put together a report at the end of it, which we'll happily share with people, because we need to know what do mental health first aiders do now, and where are those gaps, how we can support them even more.
Absolutely. Well, that link to that survey is coming up now in the chat. It's such a great chance to participate in that. And also saw a question in the chat there around how to advocate to kind of directors and senior leaders who may not believing in mental health if they're quite resilient, or resistant to that. A report like that, where there is an evidence base, and you've obviously been able to speak to many people around that and gather some of that data, can be really, really helpful in kind of showing the kind of business case for this sort of thing. But I know we've talked a lot about what happens if it isn't implemented well, and we do need to kind of remind or keep that front of our minds, because if we don't do this as it should be, then there is a risk, isn't there, if it's not implemented well? It can be risky.
Yeah, it can, and I know this has come up in the chat by some of the participants. I mean, absolutely, you're putting people in vulnerable positions with just 2 days training, and then very little follow-up until 3 years later, when you hopefully remember they need refresher training. It's just not adequate. It really isn't, and it's risky. It's risky to the people on a personal level, but it's also risky to the business. You are not fulfilling. Well, in a sense, it's the fact that if you're going to put this in place, put it in place right, because poorly supported MHFAs can burn out. Likely some of them will be overstepping, or they could end up in situations where themselves or the person they're supporting just aren't safe. And that is creating risk for the business, both legally and reputationally.
And do you think maybe MHFAs are sometimes expected to take on a lot more than they should?
I actually don't believe that they're formally expected to, but I know that they do. Our research showed this really clearly. And it can happen for 2 reasons. One, as I mentioned, the MHFA desperately wants to help. We never like seeing another human being in pain. They want to help, and in doing so, they take on more than they should. They take on more responsibility. And secondly, mental health first aiders often find themselves being seen by those they're helping as counsellors or problem solvers. And so they end up managing these things well outside of their remits. That's why those clear boundaries, the good role scoping right from the outset, and then also the line manager support are so crucial.
Absolutely. And then how do things like then the confidentiality issues that come up, or burnout or training gaps, how do they affect then sustainability of this kind of program?
I mean, they're make or break entirely. If people don't trust the confidentiality, they're not going to speak up. Something we've grappled with time and again as we've developed products and solutions to really support mental health first aiders and get that insight as well. Because if a mental health first aider burns out, if colleagues don't trust it's confidential, the whole network collapses. If there's no ongoing development, the role can quickly become redundant. If people don't know about them, they're not going to reach out. If the culture isn't right, no one's going to speak up. And worst case scenario, it literally just becomes a harmful intervention that's not working. And that's why I can't labour enough. Training's the start. The sustainability needs a full-on end-to-end structure behind it.
So it was really, really great points for us to bear in mind for thinking about this or any sort of mental health support. And let's just actually take a look at the last clip now from our course. It's all about building that culture that supports mental well-being.
Sometimes it is about the culture in the workplace or the organisation, but how you change that, of course, is by starting to have the right conversations, using the right language, and making sure that people aren't avoiding the issues and avoiding the problems. So yes, I think sometimes it is about the culture, and it can be quite broad, and there's a need to really ensure that we're changing things fundamentally. But we shouldn't use that as an excuse. I think sometimes people don't take action because they'll say things like, the culture doesn't support me, particularly if you're a manager and you want to have the right conversations. So you change the culture, one step at a time and through behaviour.
This is not just about managing people with mental health problems. It's about being a good manager. So one would hope that in a preventative way, that you have good relationships with the people that you manage, that you meet with them one-to-one, that you know them as people, and that you understand some of the team dynamics that are going on. So if you suspect that somebody, for whatever reason, is having some mental health issues, you actually have a relationship where you start from. So you suddenly don't say to them, how are you? And they think, why on earth are they asking me how I am? It's part of an ongoing management relationship. So the starting point for all managers is good working relationships and good management practice.
So that was there just a clip from the course about how to make that more supportive culture. Please do write demo if you want to see more about that, courses, or write Ripple if you'd like to chat more to Eileen. So a lot of people have been asking this in the chat as we've gone through. What actually does work then when it comes to peer-based mental health support work?
Yeah, and well, I mean, it's clear and simple. What really works, particularly with peer support, is that it's embedded in a much wider wellbeing strategy, and that it's supported, both the mental health first aiders, but also the program itself as an actual intervention is supported, and that it's also structured. It's not just training and then it's set adrift. And that really looks like regular connection with the network, good supervision. We call it reflective practice because, of course, they're not trained therapists. Clear escalation pathways, a responsibility for signposting. Those are the things that protect both the peer and also the person that they're supporting. And when it's done well, peer support can be incredibly effective. And we've seen sometimes it's more effective than formal interventions, even if only because it's signposting people to specific interventions that will then help them going forward. And what we've discovered is the opportunity for valuable insight that comes from those conversations that the MHFAs are having, that allows for a much richer program of well-being. And of course, all of that, we've developed tools and solutions for that, all without affecting the privacy of the colleague and the real sort of detail of the conversation that's been had.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that it's actually it came out for a reason, because it does, it can work when done really well. And obviously you've seen a lot of programs like these delivered in different kinds of companies. And what would you say then needs to change, you think, in how MHFA is delivered and integrated into an organization?
I mean, we need to stop thinking mental health first aid is a standalone fix. That film we just looked at talked about culture, talked about relationship and conversations, and spoke clearly about managers. And we saw in the poll how important managers are. Too often peer support networks are rolled out without the clarity of how it fits into the wider support system, what their role is, what the manager role is. And I think that's when it becomes vulnerable and it doesn't have the impact. And you end up with mental health first aiders getting this sense of role drift, or it just becomes quietly forgotten. It just has to be more than a training course. It needs proper investment in structure, strategy, and follow-up for that ROI to be achieved. And we've seen that happen. We've been working with organizations who have had that mindset shift, and the difference in the uptake of the peer support network, and the impact is huge.
And how would we go about then, let's say, taking an MHFA program and making it part of a broader or more systemic mental health and wellbeing strategy in our organization?
Well, I think it is by starting to ask, where does this role sit in the organization? How is it supported? Who's accountable for it? I've spoken to organizations who don't even know who their mental health first aiders are. So how on earth could they be supporting them or tracking that they're doing the right thing? Mental health first aid should complement, not replace, what is already the structure of a wellbeing program. It should sit alongside, absolutely, manager capability. But also, how does it dovetail into employee assistance programs, the risk management within the business, that proactive culture work? We shouldn't think of culture and engagement programs as any different, really. They're all one. It needs to be integrated. It's about seeing mental health first aid, peer support as one piece of a much bigger jigsaw, And also, importantly, constantly bang on about this. Let's track it like you would any other business critical initiative. And that is one of the main reasons we developed the solution Plato that I keep referencing, because that's where you get that opportunity to track what's happening in these conversations at that kind of aggregated anonymous level. That creates a structure around the mental health first aid network, and it helps the organization see what's happening on the ground, anonymously spot patterns and make sure the peer supporters are operating safely and sustainably themselves. And as I say, all without breaching trust or privacy. That's the kind of data, well-being data that turns mental health first aiders into a learning tool, not just a support tool. It's part of a joined up system, not just reactive care.
Absolutely. And what should then we be asking ourselves? And let's say we are interested in delivering a program like this. What should we be asking ourselves before we start rolling out an MHFA kind of program?
Yeah, I think I'd be asking, is the culture ready for it? If you want to see an ROI on training up peer supports, you need to know that they're going to be able to do the job of a peer support. And so sometimes we work with organizations and we start with the managers. We start with them because the managers and the leaders are so crucial to creating that psychologically safe environment within which peer support can happen. And then, of course, moving on to, as I say, the selection process. Are we selecting the right people for the role, not just allowing people to volunteer? Are they the right volunteer? And then identifying, what do you want success to look like? If you're making thousands of pounds worth of investment, let's not have a metric of tick, we've done the training. For me, that would be a red flag. Is it perhaps instead to be saying, well, what do we want to achieve with it? And looking at objective as well as subjective measures. So sometimes we do ask clients to just pause before they roll it out. And that's not what they're always expecting to hear when they first start talking to us.
Yeah. That's a really, really good point, though. And also, I know things like support and boundaries have come up a lot in our conversation today already. How would you then go about making sure the MHFAs do have that kind of support and have those real boundaries that they need, obviously, to make this a success?
Yeah, they need to be designed in from day one, literally how you recruit. Certainly in the application process, we recommend there is a particular question that will tease out what they think the boundaries of that role might be and where they would recognize and step back and how they'd emotionally detach from those kind of conversations. And it also means clearly scope out that role. We advocate having a role description. And then, of course, in that post support, reflective practice allows us, because that's run by a clinician, allows us to tease out whether someone might be overstepping the mark, whether they're struggling with emotional detachment, and then ultimately line manager backing as well. I mean, ideally, they're able to access tools that can help, or an organization can access tools that track the mental health first aiders activity, what they're doing, are they staying safe? And that's where a platform like Plato really comes in. It's really useful. It's a way for mental health first aiders to stay connected, signpost effectively, and then, of course, access support themselves. Because, ultimately, it's not just about giving people a 2-day course. It's about giving them a whole infrastructure to sustain that in a healthy way. And we often help organizations create what I call this sort of life journey of the mental health first aider, from selection all the way through to ongoing post-training support. It's how I believe that we create the next generation of mental health first aiders. It's a gold standard approach to peer support, and it'll be a game changer. It is for some companies already.
Definitely. And I know you have a fantastic guide to mental health first aid at work, and a link to that is coming up in the chat now. So if you want to get all of that fantastic advice distilled into a document, download that guide now from Ripple&Co and a look through. It's really, really got so much great advice and support into it. So it's really a fantastic read, and the link to that in the chat. So before we get to some of more of your questions that we've had come in during the day and also before when you were registering, we just want to ask one more poll question for today. Does your organization use e-learning for mental health training? So we've talked a lot about face-to-face training up until now, but are you using e-learning for mental health training? Yes, you've got ongoing training. Maybe you did it once, not yet, but you'd like to, no plans to do so, or not sure. So do you use e-learning for mental health training? Yes, you've got ongoing training. You did it once, not yet, but would like to, no plans to do so, or not sure. So give everyone a moment to answer that question. And please do keep your thoughts coming into the chat. We've had so many fantastic thoughts in. And we will also look at some of the questions that came in before this webinar as well. So 23% are doing ongoing training and e-learning, 9% did it once, 23% not yet, but would like to, 30% no plans to do so, 14% not sure. It's an interesting spread of results there. Now, we've covered a lot today around mental health first aid, and I want to start looking at, okay, what's the next step? How do we, where does this go on to? So would you say there's any case for replacing MHFA with a different kind of approach, or is it more about the evolution towards something more holistic?
Yeah, for me, it's about evolution. The concept of peer support is powerful. I just think the current model needs strengthening. As I say, MHFA England have done an incredible job of promoting the concept of mental health first aid and even put it on the government's agenda in their attempts to legally mandate it. But I think now we recognise it needs more structure, needs more clarity, more adaptability. So no, I wouldn't throw it out, but I would definitely rework the foundations. If I had a blank sheet of paper, well, we'd probably design something a little bit more robust right from the outset.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that'd be a good way to start from the start again. But we are where we are, aren't we? And would you say there's any like complementary approaches that organizations would want to consider alongside MHFA?
Yeah, 100%. Manager training every time. This is a big one because line managers have such a huge influence on day-to-day well-being. They control so many aspects of an employee's job, and they're often the first line of support, whether they realize it or not. Many managers are promoted based on technical ability and not because they're natural people leaders. So we can't just assume they'll know how to respond if someone starts to open up, or as we saw in the video, we want them to already have that relationship which helps someone open up. So what works with managers is giving them the skills and the confidence to have real human conversations. And we created an immersive conversation-based training solution around this using live actors. For me, that sometimes you need to be immersed in the experiential element of it so that they can practice. They've got that space to practice, get it wrong, reflect, build emotional fluency. So, when managers are supported to show up with empathy and clarity, the ripple effect, it's huge across the entire team.
Absolutely. And I can see why Ripple is such a great name for this, because it really is about the ripple effect, isn't it? But would you say there's any sectors or is any kind of workplaces where this is just not going to work?
I don't think it's so much that it wouldn't work. I think it might need adapting. We work with a lot of high risk sectors like construction, field engineering, logistics. And we're big believers that you just can't lift and shift stuff, the standard model, which is why nothing's really standard and off the shelf. You've got to tailor it to the reality of the job. So we've had to do some creative redesigns in those spaces, and it's taught us a lot about how even a standard course like mental health first aid training can, in its delivery, be adapted to be more relatable to the worker profile who is presented depending on the organization they work for.
Fantastic. It was really, really great thoughts, great advice. And I know we've covered a lot, but just maybe to get some of your final thoughts on this before we finish up for today. What's maybe one thing that you wished every HR L&D leader understood then about MHFA?
That it's the starting line, not the finish. It's a role. Mental health first aid is a role, not a one-off event. And that the way you support that role will make or break it. So if you want to create something that's real, that has lasting impact, it's not about what you offer. It's about what you embed in the organization. I've seen the same training land completely differently in two organizations, and the difference was everything that was put around it. Yeah.
And we mentioned before, if we could redesign this from scratch, what might it look like? So what do you think it would look like if you could do all this from a blank piece of paper? What would that kind of support look like?
Well, I think I'm going to sort of chunk it up even more than that and say let's look at employee well-being, and because it has such a massive impact on your regular kind of business KPIs like productivity, innovation, creativity, engagement, loyalty, retention, absenteeism, I would make employee well-being like any other key business metric. Track it, review it, act upon it. Imagine if well-being as a metric sat on a leadership dashboard, right next to revenue and risk. Because if you're not getting the employee well-being right, it's a risk. If you are getting it right, it'll impact your bottom line. The data is there. When it's measured well, it's predictive. Well-being is completely predictive of productivity, engagement, safety, retention, customer satisfaction, share price. It's incredible. It wouldn't sit in a silo under HR or L&D. It would be completely embedded into leadership development, performance, conversations, culture. The other thing I would say as well is, if I had that magic wand, support would be layered from your proactive manager and their capability to the peer supports, the mental health first aiders, and then ultimately, if needed, professional help. Because most importantly, it would be sustainable that way. It's not a reactive scramble after something when it goes wrong, but a consistent thread that runs through the business in how people lead, how they communicate, just how they work every day. And I know that might sound ambitious, but well, I guess it is. But we're already doing it. That's what we're doing with some of our clients, and it's working.
Fantastic. It was a really, really great note to end on, that we can be ambitious, and there is every reason to be. Thank you so much, Eileen, for taking us through that. It was really such a great journey through MHFA, and so many interesting thoughts and perspective for us to take away. Please do write Ripple into the chat if you want to carry on that conversation with Eileen. So much more, I guess, to talk about for so many of our organizations. Thank you for everyone who came along today. Bye for now.